So I know a little bit of how it works. Now, Sean, do you want to tell us what it's all about, or do you want to just wait for the attack on the questions?
First
His
of all,
internet's about to fail, Chair.
the joys of Zoom. First of all, thank you, members, for inviting me to your Parish Council meeting tonight. It's appreciated. And can I just compliment you on using Zoom and the slides at the beginning. It's very professional and a lot better than some parish councils that I've been to. So I compliment you on that. If you've worked in a planning department previously, you understand how busy it can be. Yes. And you call yourself a dog's body. I feel like that sometimes, even though I'm the planning manager, and I know a few of my staff do because they get pulled from pillar to post. But the invite came to me fairly late on, so I haven't prepared a presentation as such for you. I mean, I can talk about 5-year housing land supply, I can talk about your spatial strategy. What I don't really want to talk about is the case-specific applications and the like, just because I haven't got the information here in front of me on those, and it's a case officer that you really need to speak to about those. But I can certainly go back to the office with any queries that you may have on any case-specific issues. So, you know, we can run through those in a bit if you like. I believe you've got some questions set up for me. Yes. Should we just do this as a bit of a question and answer session and see how we go? And if you want any further information, I'm more than happy to answer.
Before you start that, I think our main problem in Halwill has been the building that's been permitted outside the agreed development area. Yeah. Now, I think that Don's got some specific questions. Have you, Don?
Well, I sent them to you. I can probably screen share them again on the, if you like. Yeah. But really, the big question, so this is actually not driven by Halwill specifically, but by Black Torrington, who haven't turned up for some reason. But really what it's about is, until you can demonstrate a 5-year land supply, is there any point in us putting any objection into dwellings? You know, that's the fundamental at the bottom of it. Are we just wasting our time looking at these?
Yeah.
Over to you, Sean.
Yeah, okay, land supply. Yeah, 5-year land supply is a bit of a thorny issue, and we at the District Council empathise with parish councils with this issue, and we have as much concerns as you do. I think it's fair to say that Halwill in particular has got a strong spatial strategy, which I understand you contributed to fairly proactively in the local plan period. So it's disappointing that we find ourselves without a 5-year housing land supply. It's probably worth me just going over what 5-year housing land supply actually is and what it means, because the term is bandied around quite a lot, and it's in the national press quite a lot as well as the local press.
You're breaking up, Sean.
We had a local plan. Breaking up, can you hear me?
You're breaking up.
Can you hear me? You keep breaking up a bit, mate.
Get a bit closer to the iPad. Yeah. Is that any better if I get closer to the iPad?
Yeah, that's lovely.
Yeah, that's okay.
Yeah, okay, I'll stay close. Yeah. You'll have my big face in front of you, I'm afraid, but if that makes you hear me.
We can cope, yeah.
Yeah, so the 5-year housing land supply it's bandied around quite a lot, the phrase 5-year housing land supply. And what it essentially means is that it's a directive from the government within national policy that every local authority area needs what's called a 5-year housing land supply. When our local plan was adopted in October 2018, by way of adoption of the local plan, it meant we had a 5-year housing land supply, and that couldn't be tested for a period of 12 months. So that was adopted in October 2018. A period of 12 months went by. And then we had an appeal in Torrington, which is called the Burwood appeal, which you may or may not be aware of. And that was a refusal of a residential site outside of the development boundary of Torrington. The basis of the appeal was that Torridge couldn't demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply. And it went through a public inquiry, and it was quite brutal, if I'm being frank. And basically our delivery of housing was forensically examined by the planning inspector at that stage. The difficulty we have as a council, and the difficulty we have nationally, and why there's so much discontent about a 5-year housing land supply, is that it's not the amount of planning permissions granted, It's actually the delivery of those homes. That's what's tested. And this is why we went through a public inquiry, going through each and every site, actually deciding whether those could actually be built within a certain period of time. The difficulty we had at Torridge, we've granted over and above what we need in planning permissions of housing to meet our 5-year housing land supply. The trouble we have is they're not actually being built. Our major sites weren't being built. And of course, if you go to a developer to ask when is it going to be built, it's actually in their interest to say it won't be built until after a certain date, because then you can't use that as part of the 5-year housing land supply. So it's not necessarily a level playing field, but we do our best. And we have actually, over the last 6 months, seen a huge amount of development within the Torridge area and a huge amount of activity within the planning department, which gives us some confidence moving forward. Now, going back to your question about whether it's worth commenting on any developments outside, absolutely yes. You know, parish councils are really important to us. I think it's probably fair to say that what we would expect from parish council is that local knowledge. And it's also useful for us to have a parish council's response there if we go to an appeal process, because it shows that there's a local feeling in the community. What is difficult for us, of course, is if a parish council objects to a scheme, which on a tilted balance, and that's how you need to consider 5-year housing land supply sites, is considered to be a sustainable development. It may be outside a development boundary, but from what we've seen from appeal decisions and the like, that would still be classed as a sustainable development, and we'd have to grant planning permission for it. Well, I say we have to, we don't have to, but chances are that if we go to appeal, we'd lose the appeal. And therefore, as professional officers, we would recommend that's approved, be that contrary to a parish council's consultation response or a number of objections that we may receive. And that happens across the country. That's not unique to Torridge District Council at all. The next question normally is, well, when do we know, when do we get back a 5-year housing land supply? And we can tend to look at that once a year, so every year. And we're hoping to be able to look at that next year at some point, depending on what happens to the local plan and if the local plan actually gets reviewed. If the local plan gets reviewed, then it gets reset anyway for 12 months. So there is some light at the end of the tunnel, but at the moment, as it stands, we cannot demonstrate that 5-year housing land supply, and therefore we have to be looking at sites outside of development boundaries as well.
I think what hurts us is the fact that we sweat blood to get that plan through, the local development plan, and then it would appear that you're just ignoring it. I mean, our first recourse is to have a go at you because you're the one sitting in the chair. Yeah, absolutely, and we expect that. If it's, we also dislike the 5-year housing land supply position. We've spent a number of years on that local plan, as you know, as well as all of our parish councils, and we were very happy when it was adopted. And then to lose that land supply in a fairly swift manner hurt us as well. And as planners, we want to deliver spatial strategies as seen by the community and as put forward by the community, as Halwill's is. But also we have to be aware of national policy, and it's a national policy that triggers the 5-year housing land supply as opposed to any local policy or any policy within Torridge District Council. So we have to abide by national policy in the first instance, and it goes down to local policy. And unfortunately, whilst national policy is as it is, we have to look at the 5-year housing land supply, and yeah, the appeal was king on that as it stands at the moment. What it is also useful for parish councils in their consultation response, as well as the local aspects that we may not know about at Torridge District Council. It's useful to keep on talking about the spatial strategy in your consultation responses. It may feel like you're being ignored, but you're not, because eventually there's going to be a stage, and I can't tell you when this stage is. Then we actually look at your spatial strategy, the concerns from parish council, and say, actually, enough's enough for Halwill. You've got your spatial strategy that seeks X amount of dwellings. The 5-year housing land supply means that we need to look over and above that, but there's going to be a certain stage where that number over and above that isn't sustainable.
And when we get to that stage, it's helpful to have Parish Council keeps on commenting about objecting to each application as it comes in. So I'd encourage you to carry on doing as you're doing. Before this meeting, I had a look at some of your consultation responses, and they're good, as well as Black Torrington as well, because I was expecting Black Torrington to be at that meeting. And they're good, and I would encourage you to carry on with those consultation responses. But I am aware that it feels like you're just being overruled all the time. And yes, you are, but we are aware of that, and our hands are somewhat tied by the national policy at the moment. And we do try to articulate that in our delegated reports. I have to say some delegated reports are better than others, depending on capacities at the time. But we do try to articulate that, and especially if you have any other issues away from 5-year housing land supply that you're objecting to, and we approve an application, we will try to articulate why we approved that within the delegated report, so you can see that.
Right, thank you. Now, I know that one or two of you have got things that you want to ask Mr. Harrington. Who wants to start? Roger? Roger,
yeah.
L.
On the area down my part of the world, where by Guscott's there.
Yeah, that's the Landoff Station Road, isn't it?
That's the one, I think.
Yeah, for 3 dwellings.
When they first put their for planning permission, it was refused, and then it was refused a second time up country, and we were told that it was a protected green space area. Now, all of a sudden, it's no longer protected, and we're having 3 houses built on that. So what has happened? Has nobody read that report, or is it just wasting our time?
Yeah, so that would be because, without knowing the specifics of that case, that would be because of the 5-year housing land supply issue. So I imagine that the area was outside the development boundary, and somebody can correct me if I'm wrong. So it's outside the development boundary. So at the time that was determined and refused, and the appeal was refused, it would have been outside the development boundary. However, the 5-year housing land supply situation, again, national policy, then it essentially removes that development boundary. And we have to look at those applications in the round, as in whether that's sustainable. Clearly, a arbitrary line on the plan, as it would appear to an inspector, for example, one side of it doesn't mean it's sustainable, and the other side is not sustainable. So what happened in that instance was the national policy context changed with regard to 5-year housing land supply, and therefore from then onwards, it's a site that we'd have to look at for development and look at favourably by the sounds of it.
In the national site, green fields were to be protected. This field was stated to be protected, but you still allowed the housing to be built. So you've ignored the national affair and you've ignored the local complaints. So to me, where do we go from there?
Yeah, it would have been a site in the open countryside.
Yes, it is.
The 5-year housing land supply goes over and above development boundaries, so it allows development in the open countryside. It's not green belt. We don't have any green belt in Torridge District Council, which is a green belt is a national protection of countryside. There is no green belt in Torridge District Council. It is just open countryside. And within those schemes, we'd have to look under 5-year housing land supply. We'd have to look at how well related it is to built development, and how well, etc. What we wouldn't be permitting is isolated development. So development maybe 3 or 4 fields away from the built form of Halwill. We wouldn't be supportive of that. But development which it's a green field, granted, but is adjacent to built form or adjacent to a development boundary, then yes, we'd have to look at that from a 5-year housing land supply perspective.
Now, if the planning permission that they've been granted is for 3 houses, what happens? Will they apply for another 23 next year? And you'll have to grant that?
Yeah, that's clearly something that I can't answer, whether they would apply for or not. What I would say is if they came in for another 23 afterwards, we'd look at the spatial strategy and we'd probably see what's been granted also at Halwill. That probably, the balance of that would be incorrect for your settlement. That would be too significant a development. I can't foresee what a developer may or may not do with regard to applying for planning permission, but we have to assess each application on its own merits when it's submitted.
Right, thank you.
If, as you say, perhaps in 12 months' time you can satisfy your 5-year land supply, if a development like that did seek to be extended by another 30 or 40 dwellings, with the fact that your land supply was then satisfied, stop further development?
Absolutely, yeah, that would be a refusal, and you'd be in the same position as you were when it was refused previously.
Okay.
And also we'd be 100% confident that that would be refused at appeal as well.
Okay, thanks. That's
Thank
reassuring.
you. Yes, that's some comfort, isn't it?
Not really.
The difficulty is we need houses being built to satisfy the 5-year housing land supply. And the numbers we're talking about, the supply that we have got at the moment is 4.23 years. So about what's classed about 3/4 of a year below, which I think off the top of my head is about 600 dwellings over the plan area. And that's our strategic site. So that's the big residential sites around Bideford, for example, or Torrington. And they aren't coming online as quickly as we'd like. They tend to be built in phases. But clearly that amount of dwellings is a significant number of dwellings. I should add it's across the North Devon district area as well. So it's not just Torridge, it's a joint 5-year housing land supply. So it's all development you also see in Barnstable and the North Devon area as well as the Torridge area.
I have seen that development up there, and I reckon by next year Torrington, Barnstable and Bideford will have joined, so we will have to get a new council in then.
Chair, if I could just come.
Councillor Hackett or Councillor Watson,
Yeah.
which one are you?
Well, it's me, Jenny.
Okay.
This is not just a problem that is with Torridge. It is a national problem, and it was picked up in one of our satirical magazines, and it was described as thus, very succinctly, which I think just sums up.
Oh yeah.
You know, that is the problem. It's basically the developers at the moment have the upper hand above the planners, who have a strategic strategy, and we have our local plan, and it's being held to fortune by this problem. And until primary legislation addresses it, it will continue to be thus.
Interestingly, if I can just add to that, you may have seen the planning white paper, which was advertised or was consulted on probably a month or two ago now, which is looking at wholesale planning reforms. And part of that white paper, it actually didn't include a 5-year housing land supply. So if they were to come into play as well, the 5-year housing land supply is removed from that element. There are lots of other implications of planning reform, which I won't go into now because I'll be here for weeks talking about it. But yeah, 5-year housing land supply was interestingly removed from that white paper.
The thing as well with these extra housing and that, there's not the facilities in the village. There's not the school places. There's not the shopping or anything. You're building in an area where there isn't the facilities for the supply to supply the people.
Yeah.
Yeah, because
I mean,
the houses
it's
are
going to
being
end
built,
up
we're
going to end up as just being an overflow place, like out of London.
Yeah, with 5-year housing land supplies, sites, we do look to the Education Authority for their consultation response. So we seek monies for education, excuse me, NHS, highways and affordable housing. I totally understand what you're saying and the feeling of that. Of course, there's also arguments that which a developer would put forward that actually more dwellings in a location such as Halwill would make it more attractive for a viable village shop, post office, etc. Whether anybody goes along with that or not, I don't know. I'm not sure I necessarily do in particular contexts, but I've heard an inspector say it to me. So there are elements of that. We would certainly seek from an education perspective any monies that the Devon County Council would require for school extensions, etc. And if it transpired that Devon County Council were to object to a scheme because they say there's just no facility for education in that location, no way anything can be expanded, provided, then that could be a reason for refusal, and it would no longer be sustainable development. So we do look at all of those elements.
So
I
You only
understand
look at them when they're brought to your attention.
As a matter of course, we consult to the Education Authority,
Right.
etc. So yeah, that's as a matter of course we have to look at that.
Yeah.
We don't look at that for single dwellings, but 3 dwellings and above, we look to all of those.
Thank you. Go on, next candidate.
Please, miss. Can I ask a question as private citizen?
Yes, Mr. Osborne, yes.
Rather than clerk? So we've had a couple of instances, which I'm sure people will tell you, where we feel the roads have been, the visibility sprays and the speed of the traffic has made the proposed entrance unsafe, particularly the Summerstown Cottage and the Holly Lane farm site. But we're a consultee, but you've taken the word of Highways, who have either said it's an existing entrance, we can't object, or no, it's fine. But I mean, they're just a consultee as well. So why do you seem to take their word rather than the word of the people who actually live here?
Yeah, with Highways,
They all agree that those sites are both very dangerous to come out of.
Mm.
yeah, no, I appreciate that. Particularly with Highways, it's a technical matter, and the Highways Authority are the professionals in that field. So they are the technical professionals. If we were, for example, to have a case where the Highways Authority were okay with the application, recommended approval to it, but we had lots of concerns locally, again, if we were to refuse that purely on highway grounds, I think we'd be on a sticky wicket, if I'm being honest with you, as they are the planning highway professionals on the matter. Whilst local knowledge is really useful, and sometimes local knowledge can help in that it encourages the highway authority to look at their accident stats and things like that along the site, and sometimes it makes them actually go out and look at it a bit more thorough than what they possibly would do previously. At the end of the day, we'd have to give weight to the professional technical officers over and above the parish council on a matter such as highways.
You mean they don't actually normally come out and study the situation on the ground?
Yeah, they do. My point being that if the parish council were to suggest a certain element which they feel is dangerous, i.e. a certain bit of road furniture which is blocking visibility or something along those lines, they may take a closer look at that particular element which is concerning the parish council.
I think we're still waiting for that, and there's houses have been built already.
Well, I had a phone call from an interested party, shall we say, this afternoon, who said that the enforcement officer is due to visit the site that we're talking about tomorrow or the day after, because nothing, all the buildings going on and it's not been permitted. And the builders are just ignoring the enforcement order and carrying on.
I think, Chair, that's Holly Lane Farm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've spoke to the enforcement officer, and I think he's going tomorrow. But it's to do with the conditions. They haven't signed off the conditions that they should have done before they started building. So
well, there you go.
And James Jackson's dealing with that, Sean. And
yeah,
I spoke to James about it.
Sorry, Councillor Watson. Sorry, Chair. I can't discuss details of an enforcement case within a public meeting for various reasons. However, what I can confirm is I do know that the enforcement officer actually visited today, and he's been on site today. And I understand he's completing a report, which should be with officers, with Mr. Jackson, who's a case officer, tomorrow on that. So he has visited the site to view it.
Thank you.
There wasn't already an entrance there, was there?
Sorry?
There wasn't already an entrance there.
No.
That's an entrance they've made right near the bend.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
So if Highways have allowed that, they want to put their glasses on.
It's interesting that the contractors are so worried about speeding traffic approaching that entrance that they've hung a high-vis jacket on a pole.
Really?
Yeah.
Yes, I saw that. Sorry, Sean. I know you don't want to talk about specifics, but there was one instance, which I won't say, it is one I mentioned in my email, where the So the actual highway, the delegate, the consultee report from the highway said they didn't want to approve it, but they had to because the developer had said it was an existing entrance. But the parish council said that he bulldozed in that existing, inverted commas, entrance about a year beforehand. And the parish council said, no, there's never been an entrance there, but you chose to believe the developer and all highways rather than the parish council. I think that we're talking about Somerstown Cottage again, so
Yeah.
I think that upset me.
Yes.
No one else.
Yeah.
I think it upset us all, actually, yes.
Chair, could I ask a question through you to Sean? And
Of
can I
course.
just make this in general terms, so non-specific? If a stop notice was issued on a site, would it be in the public domain through the parish clerk? Would he get to know, or is that a private matter between the planning department and the developer?
Good point. I don't know.
Yeah, I can answer that, Chair. A stop notice is in the public domain, and it would be registered on the enforcement register, which is a public register.
Right. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Right. Anyone else want to question Sean before he dashes off?
Chair, I'm an interloper from Black Torrington, and can I thank you for
the Black Torrington refugee. Yeah.
Can I thank you for inviting me and allowing me on? We get exactly what you're saying. You have specifics to your parish, and obviously we have cases exactly the same as you guys do. Listening to Sean, it feels like parish councils are completely ignored, and it feels like that because of the 5-year, because of the housing issue that you mentioned and the 5-year plan, that anyone can build almost anywhere until you get that 5-year amount of houses completed. So it seems to be like a developer's charter at the moment, or a builder's charter. And reflecting well, you said you wouldn't allow things in a non-sustainable location. We found that you have done that, not you specifically, but the planning department. And also the Halwill Parish Council said about people are building a road access, and then through a Devon hedgerow, and then saying it had been there for years before. Well, it hadn't. I mean, that's the point of local people with local knowledge on the spot. And if you don't take account of that, really, we don't need. There's no function for us, and it feels like we're wasting our time as kind of volunteers. I honestly think we're wasting our time.
I think you're expressing the views of a lot of the Halwill councillors as well there, Mr. Mills.
Can I respond to that, Chair?
Yes.
Yeah. No, yeah, I do empathise with how you feel, but I can guarantee you're not wasting your time. I don't know the specifics of this one that we're talking about with this access that was created, and whether that could be created under permitted development in any case or what have you. So I can't comment on that, on the specifics. But we find it absolutely invaluable, the responses that we get from parish councils. It's clear that there's been some concerns about some responses that you put through that we've maybe granted planning permissions for. It's clear that the principle of development is possibly accepted under 5-year housing land. I say possibly, I use my words carefully, possibly accepted under 5-year housing land supply remit. But there's lots of other things that create a sustainable development, even going down to design, what's fitting within the village for design, that we'd want the input from the parish council. So I don't think you're wasting your time. It may feel that way to you, and I can fully understand why that occurs, especially as you get a flood of maybe decisions that go contrary to parish council's recommendation. But it does help us, and it helps us as well push our consultees or technical consultees on question them on certain matters if it's raised by the parish council, and it also helps us go back to the applicant as well. If there's some issues with like parish council raise, it could be that we can get the scheme amended. Even if the parish council had objected to it, we could get the scheme amended, which, whilst the parish council may not be happy the scheme goes forward, actually improves the development and makes it a better development, even though it goes forward. So I think there's there's huge gains to the Parish Council still being actively involved in the planning process, even under a 5-year housing land supply situation.
Can you put, sorry, Chair, can I just ask a supplementary question, please?
Yes.
You mentioned that the 5-year housing plan, and that when you address a builder or a developer, they don't have to build within that 5 years. Can't you make that conditional? Like, for example, Class Q is conditional on 3 years. Can't you give planning permission subject to it being built within a certain period of time?
No, we can. It's contrary to government policy and legislation to do so. What we can do, and what we are doing, is restricting the amount of time to actually commence development. So a standard commencement condition tends to be 3 years. So they've got 3 years to commence that development. With 5-year house land supply sites, we're reducing that to 2 years. So it encourages that commencement of that development within 2 years, else they lose the permission. And that's what we're at Torridge are doing. And actually some other councils are following suit on us. We were one of the first councils to do that. And it seems sensible, because the whole point of the 5-year housing land supply sites are that they build those sites, and it contributes to the 5-year housing land supply. So 2 years is a reasonable amount, and that's how we're attempting, again, I use that word carefully, attempting to encourage that development to take place, else they lose that permission. But we can't put a condition that requires development to be completed within a certain period of time.
Just started within the next 2 years.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So that could be just a foundation block, couldn't it? Or
Yeah,
just pouring concrete or for a footing or something.
Yeah, that would make the permission extant, and then there wouldn't be a date. Legislation says we couldn't then take enforcement action against it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Anyone else got anything to say at this stage before we release Mr. Harrington to go home for his supper or whatever?
Yeah, Chair, could I just thank Sean for turning up, and also for Pete Watson arranging it. Pete's lead member for planning, and you know, we are very, very grateful for you coming and talking to us, Sean, because we might not like what we hear, but we thank you very much for bringing it to us so that we better understand your position that we're in. Thank you.